The 5-0 Podcast.
5-0 Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the 5-0 Podcast. Thanks for being here today. Today we are here with someone named Hailey. So this is going to be the best interview yet because she has the best name. She's a trauma and EDMR trained specialist, host of her own podcast that focuses on first responders and mental health. She's a law enforcement wife. She's a trauma survivor and a barrier breaker, and she will change the game in all you thought about basic therapy. So for our listeners who don't know who you are yet, Hailey, give them a quick bio about yourself. And after we will get a little bit deeper and ask you all these mental health questions and dive in on EDMR therapy and relationship therapy.
Yes. So obviously I'm a therapist. So I always clarify this one's a little funky, and depending on if I'm in California. So California registrations are a little different than maybe certain other states and things. So I'll kind of clarify two different aspects of me as therapist. So presently, I'm an associate marriage and family therapist and associate professional clinical counselor. Marriage and family simply means I had a lot of family systems and relational dynamics within my education, in addition to the professional clinical counselor, which is more of a national registration versus family systems. This one's California specific. It does exist in other states. However, each state just different requirements, right? So I did both registrations in order to just have the PCC, which is more national, gives me the opportunity if my spouse and I ever decide we want to leave California, I have the benefit of sort of having a little bit of an easier, hopefully, transition into a registration elsewhere if that ever just became something we did in our family. So on that note as well, I always mention this because I like to be very, very, very upfront. To be licensed in the state of California, you need to have 3,000 hours of clinical time. Well, I'll clarify. Clinical and non-clinical comes into that. I believe it's 1,750 of direct client hours.
Wow.
And then you have process notes. You have advocacy. I spend a lot of time in advocacy. It's a big thing of mine. I know that you'll actually ask me some questions around my goals and what I'm doing, but advocacy is a big one. So many different layers that go into that, which means in the meantime, when you're in your associateship, post-graduation, you have your degree, gaining your hours, you're supervised. So I am supervised by a wonderful human named Renee Williams. She is a licensed clinician. She's also MFT and PCC. The cool thing is my hours are about done, so they're getting submitted so that I can step into the, here you go, state of California, here's another check.
Yes. Congratulations.
Thank you. So very excited to be there. Beyond my therapist capacity, I am a mom to the most adorable soon-to-be 3-year-old. He is the best. And yeah, I am a first responder spouse. My husband is a law enforcement officer, and quite a journey we had moving into our first responder life. We met prior to that, so I'm sure that'll be topics of conversation. And then I kind of started to add this more recently. I'd gone on a podcast couple months back, and one of the reflections the person gave to me was, when we were offline, you had the story about your childhood trauma and just what kind of led you to being a therapist, and then we got on recording and it was like, dead, you didn't say any of that. You should say that. So I'm working on getting more comfortable with being open about the, in the therapist capacity, you really separate those things, although they help give me empathy. That time's not about me. So in this sort of a forum, I will add that a big part of my story that contributes to just who I am today and why I do what I do actually comes from my own history with childhood trauma. So every form of abuse you can think of is something that happened with a parent figure of mine when I was young. And so I was in therapy, court-mandated therapy young, and really had sort of a walk through the therapeutic lens starting super young. And so my mind had already started functioning in that process. Often
Right.
people tell me like, Hailey, you don't even realize you just think different than other people. I'm like, yeah, okay. That
Well,
like
it makes sense because it's like
yeah.
it's like, okay, if I've been in dance classes my whole life, I think it'd be a lot easier for me to teach dance because I've been taught so much. Like
Mhm.
it's kind of like, and I think that it's nice that you recognize that you're always helping others in their trauma, but like it's okay for like you to speak on your trauma because I think if you're not relatable to the people that you're helping, I don't know how much you can help. You know what I mean? Like it's not like they need to know outright like what you've been through exactly, but I just feel like you probably can relate so much better to the people that you're talking to because of what you've been through. Like how could I relate to someone who's had like the most perfect life in the world if they haven't been through anything? It's just I think it makes you a better, well-rounded person to help others.
And honestly, that is so much of why I became a therapist. So the first
Oh, I have you breaking up a little bit.
is no knock on the therapist lack relatable. Oh, I think we're back. Can you hear me now?
Yes. When we were breaking up a little bit. I don't know if it's Cali or Florida, but Florida has been so crazy.
Cali. Probably Cali.
It's actually nice out today, so which is shocker of the century, but
Well, I live like on a hill where I swear Xfinity hates to provide quality service.
well, um, you want to get started into some questions. I'm glad we got to know a little bit about you.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, so you kind of just told us. My first question is just how you got started into your career. So did your whole life being in therapy lead you to this decision? Like kind of giving back to like the younger version of you? Or how did you decide this is a career path you wanted to take?
Yeah. So obviously in therapy young, and that had it stopped at some point, and I was in high school and had started to see some of the trauma play out in intimate partner relationships that I was in. And I went back to therapy and readdressed things and just kind of an older frame of mind. And you just do things a little differently in therapy than when you're 6 or 7. It's just a very different experience when you're older. I had kind of struggled with feeling really detached. And what's super interesting at that time was within the therapy landscape, there was something that I know now as a therapist that we didn't know then, which was that the symptoms of sort of this dysphoria or depression that I was experiencing was really this nervous system trauma response of I'd been so activated for so long and so anxious for so long because of really like PTSD type symptoms from this trauma that over time my body moved into a shutdown state. And anytime activation came, it was so overwhelming. So real lack of regulation, just real nervous system being tanked. And at that time, that wasn't really talked about as much trauma. And in that landscape, things were not put out in the world like this. Social media was not as big of a thing. I mean, I had
It's like a taboo subject.
Yeah, it was just it was a non-starter. And so now what we know is what I just said, right? At the time, it would have been like, oh, you have depression. We need to activate you. And that's really the kind of saying that I'll use is depression is the opposite of connection. So the goal through depression work is to establish connection. And that might look like an activation of some sort. And in trauma work, when we've shifted into a shutdown, which again, without history, without insight, without really taking that lens, we might label it as depression, but it's this shutdown, it's this nervous system response. We're needing safety, we're needing grounding. So those are really different experiences and approaches to how you would treat something that might present super similar. So I had to really go through some work in the trauma lens in the world when we started to understand these things, do my own EMDR, which was really valuable. I know I'll talk more about that later.
Yeah.
So absolutely, all of that to say, absolutely, that influenced me, and realizing that I didn't, not that I have any qualms with, like I have an open door policy. If you want to pop in, life happens. We relook at things as life happens. I always want to be a safe place to land. And obviously the goal is that you don't need me every single week. You don't need me every 2 weeks even, right? You don't need me every month. Like that is the goal. It would be a great day if therapy was not necessary ever. That would be beautiful.
Yeah.
Probably not going to happen. But I started to really kind of see as I grew and had to do my own work, just where the therapy space was evolving. And I honestly just really wanted to become the therapist that I needed and didn't have. So that was, my goal. And very grateful that the world is coming to where it is, that there's a really, truly so many wonderful therapists that do this work and speak to this now. So, it was a pretty well-known thing when I was in high school. I took an elective psych class. I was actually super into cults and serial killers. Like I was originally on a trajectory. I was going to go work for the FBI. Like,
oh, that's cool. That would be really cool.
Yeah. And really just wanting to kind of understand
the mind.
Yeah. And human behavior and just all of these connections, because obviously it became very clear to me in my life, well, these things happened in my life. Now I'm seeing how they play out. So what does that look like for other people's lives? Like, it was just so fascinating to me. And obviously those kind of like shocker stories of my first report I ever did in psych was on Jonestown. So we're talking about cults and things like that were just super intriguing to me.
Well, first responders aren't that off from that,
what is the
You're getting a little taste of it.
What's the saying that people always say? First responders are like the largest gang in
largest gang, largest fraternity. The
fraternity
the next best thing.
Pretty much.
Right.
The fraternity one rings true. Gosh, when my husband was at the academy, I made jokes about that all the time. Like if he'd call me at night. Bless you, by the way.
Excuse me.
Yeah. I was like,
fraternity
of a frat.
That's why guys like it so much.
I'm sure I would like to believe he had some fun, and I think he did, but no, it was also very brutal.
Yeah. I'm sure. Why did you choose first responder mental health? Was it after you met your husband, or was that a decision you made before you even met him?
Yeah. So after that being said, my husband was not a first responder when we started dating. So I knew it was something he wanted to do. We had sat really on our first date because some of our history, we were just both tired of the dating game. That was just super unfun for us. So we had a very serious conversation basically of like, do our values and things align, where we're going? Can we support each other through these places and goals that we have? And so I knew it was a goal he had, said yes, had no concept of what I was saying yes to. Like you think you do in that moment. You're like, I remember sitting there and being like, okay, I don't want to just give you an answer. I want to be fair to you and fair to me. And okay, yeah, of course, absolutely. And I'd always had support for first responder professions. It was definitely part of my person. But thinking about it from that lens, I was like, okay, yeah. And then we went through the academy. Part of our story is that my husband started his academy. He got injured. At the time, what would happen was he would work at an area office. The agency he works within is how that would function. Mm-hmm. And then you'd go back to the academy when you were cleared. He got cleared 3 months later, COVID hit.
Oh, God.
He shut down. He came home for several months. The academy restarted. An outbreak happened. It shut down. Back and forth.
Oh, my God.
So about 4 times.
He had a journey.
And he restarted the academy 4 times. And I'm not joking when I say like each time they backfilled and restarted. So you started all over from what's called pickup day, where they're in your face, you're doing push-ups in a suit, like a bag above your head. You
I
want
had to do that too. Yep. Mm-hmm.
They're gonna get you
So we had to start from the beginning.
Yeah.
God.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Brutal. And during that time, because, you know, COVID was such an unknown for everybody, we were so sick of between the backgrounds process originally, and that was a 2-year process, and then getting in and all of that. We just kept looking at each other. We were so sick of putting our life on hold. In the meantime, we knew that was our goal and we weren't going to stop, but we got so sick of just waiting for things like getting pregnant. So we decided, you know what? Nope. We had already had our wedding planned. It actually kind of worked out that things were shut down and we were able to have a smaller wedding.
Yeah.
He was able to not be in the academy because things were shut down. So we had our wedding that we had already planned, which was fabulous. And then we were like, let's do it. Let's get pregnant. Like, I don't want to wait. I'm sick of waiting.
Yeah.
So we got married and we started trying, and I actually got pregnant pretty quickly. And so when he came out of the academy, the way that his agency functions is you can get sent anywhere in the state. And so
in the state. Wow.
So he got sent to an office without traffic 2.5 hours away. There's always traffic. So more than that. And he would
had to move.
Yes. No. He went there. He stayed there 5 days a week, rented a room. We stayed here.
Oh my God.
I was due a month after he graduated. So he was still in his what's called break-in period field training, right? He's with his FTO, and they're, you know, that's honestly way more brutal than the academy is. I mean, you're actually having to do it now and learn the application, make sure you have standard operating procedure for that office down. I mean, just so many aspects of what comes into that period.
Yeah.
His son, 2 weeks later, he goes right back to work. He didn't take FMLA. He didn't get it. He's in training. So why first responder mental health, and to circle back, why this whole story matters is we struggled and we really got hit in the face with the stigma of shut up, don't talk about it, you're fine, keep going. And I mean, at some point there was a phone call to him from me of I can't keep going, I'm exhausted. I had birth trauma, so I was dealing with how my body was physically responding to trying to heal birth trauma. I got an autoimmune diagnosis postpartum. My thyroid was off the charts. And my son was having some medical issues. So really being in line with don't talk about it, shut it down, you need to give your all to this profession, like all of these things that I think we kind of didn't even realize that we had fallen into some of those harmful aspects of the culture. Sometimes it can be motivating, right? Sometimes that concept of like keep going is powerful and helpful, but it stopped being adaptive for us at some point. And so that is when we had to reevaluate. We had to figure out how we were going to do this. We had to figure out how we were going to keep saying yes to a first responder family life, first responder career. Yeah. And that was challenging, not just for me, but my husband really had a hard time figuring out, how do I be a first responder, a dad, a spouse to someone who's struggling? How do I do all these things?
Right.
That really started it. I had a few people when he was in the academy who had reached out just knowing what I did, kind of were having a hard time in the academy, had just chatted with me. It wasn't in my therapist capacity, but we just chatted. Obviously, again, back to what I said earlier, having so much of that just part of my mental process in general, that obviously part of those like therapy components come into those conversations.
Right.
But we just chatted, when they were tired, and I was like, okay, let's just breathe together. Let's just talk about it. Let's just talk about how fucking stupid this is right now.
Yeah.
That you
Yeah.
write a memo. Let's just blurt that out. Okay, now let's take a couple breaths. Do you got it? Go. Right. And that's sort of the way that I helped support some people through an academy. And it looks a little bit like that in their career, right? Like you get back to it.
Yeah.
That's a little different than what I would say when we're talking about home life and that incongruence of what those things look like. So it just really started to become very clear, the incongruence, the balance struggle that exists in first responder careers.
Yes, the balance.
Yes. And so I dove into trainings after that, talked to other people. I'm sort of, I guess, known for collaborating, like talking to other providers, talking to just other peers. Like, I really want to create a cool place that we can all learn from each other and help grow, as so many things will grow in this area, so that we can stay culturally competent and we can help and we can have resources beyond just one person for people. So really the inspiration came from some really crappy times in our life.
Yeah. I'm a first responder and about to be a first responder wife as well. So I can relate on both ends, and it's hard. I mean, we work opposite schedules. I work from 7 to 7 at night. He works from 7 to 7 in the morning. And I haven't been pregnant yet or had a baby yet, but I already can imagine the struggles that there could be while, going through an academy or working long hours and weekends and COVID and babies. And yeah, so it's nice to hear that all these things that happen in your life, you're kind of like taking that and giving back to people who also experienced it in like an educational, purposeful way. Because like I want to help people too, but I'm not a therapist, So it's good that you have the credentials and like you can genuinely help people who have gone through things I've gone through, you've gone through, and so on and so forth. So appreciate you. Oh, first of all.
I appreciate you. Honestly, it's just one of the ways that I put meaning and purpose around.
Yeah.
Honestly, long before obviously being a first responder, I've had a history of just wounds that I've had to work through in life. And this is just one of the ways I think that one of the ways it helps me keep going. And I know I spoke to it earlier, but it's super important to me to name that, keeping that balance of, yes, that was my story. And also that doesn't have to be your exact story. That doesn't have to be someone else's exact story. And the difference between maybe a therapist and maybe the way I would talk to my best friend is that I'm not in the business of advice. So what I can do is be empathetic, that when I say it, I mean that I get it. I didn't just read it in a textbook, like build empathy, say you understand. Like, no, I'm not fake either. I don't just pull things out of a textbook. I've always said I'm not a blank wall type therapist, but I'm not the type of person in that capacity either that would bring my own stuff into it. So where it's valuable to know, sure, I tell people, yes, I'm a first responder spouse, and absolutely I struggled with postpartum and all of those things. But what that taught me is to ask the right questions and to know sort of, if I look at a first responder and I say, hey, when you're working, let's go this way instead. When you're working, I would like you to do this grounding activity after every call.
It's so hard. But it's not hard.
It's not going to work, though. It's probably not going to work. Now, there's absolutely times where maybe you have a moment. But when you're in that mode, the difference between being culturally competent and not is that I know when, where, and how matters. And so that might not happen after a call, but it might happen when you're on your way home, or it might happen when you get home. And so there's a difference in where I might look at someone who works a sales job and say, Okay, like you nailed that phone call. Before you make your next call, like just take some deep breaths and then make the call, or spend 5 minutes, get up, go to the restroom. That's a very different intervention process than
Yeah.
what you would give a first responder. So
Yeah.
part of that experience and having it is simply being able to navigate the the process in which somebody might find help in integrating some of the things that are taught in therapy. That absolutely looks different for a first responder than it does for me when I
Totally.
work at the sales desk, or me in between my client sessions, right? I mean, I have the benefit of scheduling 20 minutes before my next one so that I can do my note and kind of clear that out, and right.
Right. But we don't. We go from call to call and you don't know what you're going to get. And yeah.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I could probably try to breathe, but I forget. So
You'd forget.
I do. I don't
So
take time for myself while I'm working. Absolutely not. The biggest treat I get myself while I'm working is like go to 7-Eleven and get myself a snack or a drink. That's like my treat to myself at 12 hours. Like that's my happy place, you know? Or take my lunch break if I get it.
if you
That's
get
my
it,
happy
yes.
place.
Yes, shocking if you get it. Right. Yeah. So just those concepts, right? Of versus somebody where I might say, hey, try this daily. Instead, for a first responder and a first responder family, I might say, look at it weekly. So your work week is
Yes.
3 or 4 days. What we do during that doesn't need to be what we do when we come out of the work week, so to speak, right? And
Right.
so looking at it in that lens versus on a daily lens. Because think about like fire professions, right? Well, if you're a fire spouse, your spouse is at the station for X many days for that tour, right?
Right.
So if I look at you, depending on your support systems, this matters, right? But if I
Right.
look at you and you have very limited support, and I say, and you have 3 kids, right? Let's just say, and I go, I want you to every single day do yoga. You're probably going to laugh at maybe that
Like,
works. Kids are like in with you and they're doing great and they all nap at the same time or whatever it is, right? But if I'm like,
yeah.
you need some time to yourself to do yoga every single day, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, this is a therapist who doesn't get it. But if I look at you and I say, well, can we incorporate the kids? Can we call someone to watch this one and you can go for a walk with this kid, or whatever that looks like, to really kind of get in that nitty gritty of the reality of the schedules and things that happen in first responder families, that super matters. And so just even understanding that difference, right?
Right.
That's where all of these things become powerful. And then, of course, like I already said, it's individual as well. What I do won't be what you do, and et cetera. But we can absolutely go through those culturally competent questions and understanding and sit with that so we can find it.
Right. And I think that's something hopefully like listeners who are listening will hear and understand, because I know a lot of people are really hesitant about going to therapy. But if you're a good therapist, they'll tailor their therapy to you. Like they'll ask you, like, I've been in therapy, and she's like, I chose one that in her bio says I like humor and stuff like that. And I have a lot of self-deprecating humor, and I can't help it. But when I saw in her bio that she's like, it's funny and whatever, I chose her, and because I wanted her to relate to me, and she'll ask me stuff up front, and I'll be like, listen, if you want to, I know you're not allowed to, but if you go to cocktails with your girlfriends and you want to tell them about my crazy life, like, please, like, you're totally allowed. And she'd laugh. So, like, whatever. Obviously, she's not allowed to, but like, but I've had therapists before that I didn't really connect to, like, just the way that they'd speak, like, very soft and stuff. And for me, I couldn't even connect to that because my personality is so strong. And I needed, like, someone even like more dominant than me to like kind of make me feel like, I don't even know how to describe it, but I needed like a loud, dominant person on the other side of the I did Zoom on the other side of the camera to kind of like make me feel heard. It just, depending on your person, like they will tailor the needs to you. And it sounds like that's exactly what you do. But I really talk about EDMR therapy. I had a lot of questions about this for my followers and obviously myself. I do know one friend that actually did do it, and he said it changed his entire life and it was crazy. But will you tell us about EDMR therapy and what it stands for and what it means? And then we'll get into the questions.
Yeah. So first I'll clarify EMDR.
I'm sorry. EMDR. I wrote it down wrong. I don't know. I don't even know how to say it. That's how much I don't know about it.
No, it's really,
EMDR. Okay.
wait until you hear what that stands for. It'll be even more. What?
I'm so excited.
But so EMDR, it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
So EMDR is a trauma modality where it's evidence-based, it's accepted within insurance companies as an evidence-based practice, which is super valuable. That took some time to obviously have the research done and all of those things to clear and get approved. And what EMDR seeks to do is take something that is stored or coded in the brain as traumatic, help reprocess it, and move it into long-term memory. What happens in our brain is it's coding. So use that word already. I'll kind of highlight that for a moment and thinking about it in this sense of coding and sort of filing drawers. This is the easiest way I can describe it. I will also totally describe it scientifically.
No, you got to describe it for people like me who don't know what the heck.
Yeah, just the different personalities. But this is the best, more simplistic visual, I think, to provide is the filing cabinets. And so one of your filing cabinets has this trauma file in it. And when something has happened and our brain has coded it as traumatic, it ends up in that file. And what happens in our bodies is we can become triggered through our senses by things that bring out this trauma. So, for example, if I experienced a trauma where I have a matcha next to me. So maybe I was smelling matcha. And I go somewhere several weeks later, I smell matcha, and all of a sudden I'm anxious. I have a panic attack. I'm just noticing I'm not myself. I feel frozen. I feel like running away. Fight, flight kicks in. That's a clear indicator of this trauma being triggered. And when it's filed in the trauma drawer, our bodies believe it's happening in present time. So it doesn't go to long-term memory. Our bodies think it's still happening. And in fact, a lot of research is beginning to come out around the reality that our bodies will continue to think it's in present time until it's been worked through, until it's been moved. So what we do is we bring it up. This is where EMDR is a tad different than maybe traditional talk therapy, where if somebody comes into my space and they're super anxious, I can notice that they're having a difficult time orienting to the space and getting comfortable. I might work on grounding with them, which would be like, let's take some breaths. Let's just notice some stuff we're seeing here. Let's really place ourselves in the room. Let's do none of that and just blank for a moment as you get here. Maybe you just needed a second because you were rushing, whatever that looks like, right? Well, EMDR is a little different in that I need you activated. Part of trauma work includes exposure in some form. So the way that we do that is through having you bring up this memory. We pair it with bilateral stimulation. I'll explain what that is in a moment, but just stick with me. So we pair it and we allow your mind to go where the mind goes. The most important part of this process is that you trust where your brain is going. So it might look a little bit like a movie reel in your mind where you're bringing the memory up and you're watching it play out. You might go to a different memory in that process. You might just see words come up in your mind or a thought come into your mind. we own that. And we just say that your mind is absolutely doing what it needs to do to process this. And it is pulling the connections that it has made, because that's what our mind does, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have no idea why that time we almost drowned, all of a sudden, as we reprocess that, is bringing up this fight you had with your boyfriend. But for some reason, our body has made that connection. And so we let the mind just go.
Right.
And that can happen. So that's the short version of it. We go through the reprocessing. The goal is, again, to pair it with the bilateral, move it to long-term memory. And as the therapist, I function during this time a little bit more in a facilitator role, where I get to add interweaves where it's necessary and say, hey, if we're realizing through processing, it comes up like, I'm really concerned I didn't do this right on this call. And now I'm concerned I just didn't do this right on the call. So like, that's why I can't get past it. I might go, okay, well, let's go through that, right? And trust that process, and we'll go through that. And moving into sort of recognizing the thing that is the activator that created this traumatic piece, like what is actually tied to it.
Right.
And helping move to this place of, did we do the best we could? Did we actually follow protocol? Like things like this, right? Did somebody say something to us afterwards? And that's what kind of got us thinking this way.
Right. Like, is it actually the incident, or was there a piece at the incident that is triggering your response?
Right. Is it just, I realized I had many calls that day. And so that one's sticking with me because it was my last one and I was already tanked and I was tired. Okay, so we're learning we're tired. So what is it that we need? Right. So even in that moment of reprocessing, I might get really somatic and say something like, well, what is it like to kind of go back there and envision yourself giving you what you need? Did you need water? Did you need food? Did you need a minute? Did you need someone to look at you and be like, hey, wow, long fucking day.
Right.
Want to be with me? Right? Like, did you just need someone to talk to you and see you? And so we have this really cool opportunity to bring this exposure of the trauma, however that and why ever that has coded that way, and then help sort of meet the need that came up that wasn't met, that contributes to why it's being here and why it's sticking with us. And through that, the report that I often hear is I can still envision it, but it feels further away, right? So
that's what my friend said.
Mm-hmm. Big indicator that it's not present anymore, right? So back to that thing I said earlier, it's no longer present, it's far away versus right here in the moment.
Right. Wow. Okay. So another question about EMDR. Who is a good fit for EMDR? Like, let's say if someone doesn't feel like they have like one big traumatic thing in their life, are they still a good fit for it?
Mm-hmm. Can be.
Because I feel like some people do have trauma, but they don't really realize it. Is this a way to like bring it out, or no? Do you have to know your trauma before like getting into it?
So a really important disclaimer that sort of the regulatory authority, so to speak, around EMDR is called MDREA. And the statement that's super important that MDREA always teaches everybody when we get trained in EMDR is not for memory recall. It's not for trauma recall. That's not what it's for.
Got it. Okay. That's good to know.
We may start processing and something comes up and we go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. Let's just kind of take the same example of, I think I messed something up. I didn't realize that I actually did tell that person I needed that supplemental. I just didn't remember that when I was stressed, but now I remember I did ask that person for it. And so it can happen where something gets remembered, but that's never the goal of EMDR. Got it. So many people are a good fit for EMDR. PTSD is a big way that EMDR can be valuable. anxiety, even through grief and loss. It's not going to remove your grief. It can help with the trauma and activation around it. It's not going to remove grief. Super important. If we've been a sexual assault victim, if we're having traumatic memories of violence or abuse, it's really powerful for a lot of things. There are markers that we keep track of, and a big one is, can we ground? Can we talk about something activating and stay present or within a tolerant window? And that is huge. Before we can ever reprocess a memory and do the movement, we're going to take it out of the file. We're going to bring it in. We're going to have our mind be exposed to it in this way. We're going to go through it. I'm going to facilitate. We're going to help move it into reprocessing and into long-term memory so that it can find resolution, so to speak, right? We're going to learn what's unresolved and how can we help resolve it. Before we do that, we need to be able to be exposed without wanting to run out the door, without associating, right? Without completely shutting down, being able to stay firmly planted. So that's a huge marker right out the gate. It's the very first thing you learn within EMDR is how do we help resource grounding for somebody so that they can even sit through reprocessing. So many people are a good fit. That's a huge marker for me right out the gate, and I'll spend a lot of time there. The other important thing is obviously any health condition that might be affected by utilizing the bilateral stimulation. So I know I'm talking a lot, but if it's okay, I'll explain.
Yeah, it's like, because I was going to ask, so it's like there's clicking noises or like lights you follow or something like that. So is everyone use different things, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it's open to preference. Of course, if you're virtual, which great thing to name is that EMDR can be done in person or virtually. Often,
okay, that's good to know too.
Yep. Often it's therapist preference. I do both. I haven't seen really a difference in terms of someone's success, so to speak, within EMDR.
Okay.
Not impacted by being virtual or in person. They're both wonderful. Sometimes somebody on the other end has a preference, and I will obviously always respect that if they prefer to come into my office instead.
Right.
But yes, there's many forms of bilateral, and that's an individualized journey of discovering what your preference is. So you can tap where you just take both your hands, and you can, this is my personal preference, is the butterfly hug. So you tap your chest. You can go here on your arms. You can go top of your legs, and you tap one, tap the other, tap one, tap the other. And you do it with, pretty good force. Like we're not being harmful. We're not hurting ourselves, but we're also not like, oh.
Right.
We want to feel that there's some oomph to this.
I follow.
So there's that form. There's tappers is what I call them, where one vibrates in the hand, like my left hand, and the other one vibrates my right hand, and it goes back and forth. And you can adjust the intensity of the vibration, the pause between them.
Okay.
Some people absolutely do this thing, which is the taking two fingers and going left to right. This is the one where EMDR gets is this
hypnotism thing?
Yes.
Okay.
It is absolutely not. So I always make the joke with my clients before we start, like, I want to tell you right out the gate that you might look at this and be like, did not go to the county fair. I'm not at a carnival. I don't want to be hypnotized. No. And I'm like, but stick with me because that's not what it is. What it is a powerful tool for getting both hemispheres of our brain and those pathways firing to help support reprocessing. And it mimics our REM sleep. So when we are in REM, our eyes do this when we're asleep.
Oh my God, so creepy, but cool.
Yes. So we've learned through this research that that's part of our coding process. It also helps promote relaxation, decrease anxiety, getting those chemicals in our brain to help support our process and promote calm. also really speaks to that staying present, staying grounded when we bring up a trauma. That helps with that as well. So,
Is there an age limit, or can any age, like what if a 5-year-old has had trauma? Can they do this or?
yes.
Wow.
Yeah. I am not trained in the specifically in the child aspect because I don't personally see children. And obviously,
Right, because it's kind of like a different. Okay,
yeah,
got it. Yeah.
However, the basic training that's your first training you get in EMDR, and then there's protocols you can learn on top of it. The person who did my training, she actually works with children and spoke to it quite a bit, and it was fascinating.
Yeah, I could imagine. Like if an 8-year-old came in and they got this therapy and they had all this, like this one traumatic or whatever experience, like it's just different. As adults, it's almost like expected that we have some trauma, but to work with a child, I can't even imagine. That's so crazy. Okay. So, okay. Well, this is kind of what you said, but a question was, I heard EMDR therapy brings you directly back to a time and place of trauma, and that scares me. Is that true?
You do have exposure to the trauma. So not
like you said, it's like a movie reel in your mind almost.
Yep, you bring it up. Sometimes it plays out in your head when you bring it up. Sometimes you feel like you're right there in the room.
It is so crazy.
And we, again, work really, really hard to help feel grounded, help you feel safe. The most important thing is to ensure that you are ready. And before we bring up something that is, I think, how do I put this? This has always been a harder one for me to put, so stick with me. I'll try my best. There are traumas in our life that feel so big that they are very dysregulating when we feel them. And then there's some other traumas that I'm not saying it's lesser than, they're both equally as important that they've happened and they've impacted you. One of them maybe feels smaller internally and feel like we could tackle that one.
Right.
Because it doesn't feel as big as the other. So we would start primarily and first and foremost there so that you can get comfortable with the EMDR.
Got it.
You can kind of see how you respond. And then at any time, what I tell my clients is, if you can't verbalize the word stop to me, then raise your hand, or is there another gesture that would be helpful for you? What am I going to cue into is your, Hailey, we need to stop this. I need you to help me ground. I need to go to something else we established, which is calm place. We envision a calm place and have this set up beforehand. That just tells me, hey, this has moved past my capacity. I'm out of my tolerant window. Stop.
So if someone says stop and you're like mid
processing,
do you want them to finish it, or what if they never want to go back?
That's okay. They don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
the other thing we established before we start is a container. And I know some of this, I make a little joke. You spoke to humor earlier.
Yeah.
I love humor. I love a little self-deprecating, dark humor is my favorite.
We all.
I always tell people, like, all right, I get it. This might seem a little fluffy, and I get it. I just want you to try it. And if we absolutely hate it, I am somatically trained. I have other trauma modality. Like, there's so many other things we can do.
Right.
So if we hate
right.
ER, then we'll pause. We'll individualize it, etc. But one of those processes where some people get that, like, this sounds dumb reaction is with the container. And we do that prior to reprocessing as well, where we establish something that you can stick things in, you can pull it out, but it has a lid. You're the only one that's going to touch it. So when maybe we're wrapping up our time and we haven't finished reprocessing, we're going to have an image that was set already before we started for this memory, and we're going to put it in our container. So it's contained. We're going to, everyone's different. Sometimes that container is in an abyss. Sometimes it's in a storage unit. Sometimes it's on a shelf. Like,
It's
how it's
so funny. I love it.
and it
I love
helps
it.
contain what's happened. Um, I know I'm saying a lot, but super helpful within this realm is to also know that I am a big believer in EMDR parts work. So what I mean by that is sometimes in reprocessing a trauma, we have a part that experienced the trauma, which is just within us. It feels like there's different parts of us. And so there's a part that experienced the trauma and holds the wound. And then there's another part that kind of came away from it, dissociated, right? And this other part lives. Sometimes when we're processing, different parts show up. So I will also say, okay, it sounds like this part doesn't feel safe. Can we do something with the part that is wounded and we disappeared from and we can't connect to now? And operate and go back with this other part that showed up and is maybe watching, or what does that part see? Because that's what a lot of people who experience trauma go through. It's not a dissociative identity thing. I'm not talking about DID here, but there is sort of a sectioning of the self that happens. It just for any of us, right? If you go through something and you still want to try to go through daily life, then that part of you that hurts gets tucked somewhere and another part of you starts to live life.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that we can bring those together, find congruence in your parts and within you so that you can live that life where you feel like all of you is working together. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. No, it totally does. It's just like, I must have, I don't know if there's videos online, but I kind of want to watch a video of someone like in it, like getting it done to them. It's cool. It's powerful. It seems really powerful. I probably could use it. But okay. I don't remember my childhood much. Would I not be a good candidate for EMDR therapy? So I feel like people think it's only about childhood trauma for some reason. But it's not, right? It's about anything.
Yeah. So this is the other way that it's tough, right? Every time I talk about this in the first responder landscape, everybody thinks, oh, because of work. And oftentimes it's really not work. Oftentimes it's maybe exasperated by something about their career. And a lot of time it's something in their personal life. It's something in the connection or something in the process. It's not the call. Sometimes it's the call. I don't want to dismiss that. Sometimes it is. But a lot of times it's not.
Yeah.
And so why I'm bringing that up is childhood things come up a lot, actually. And a lot of people can't remember childhood things. That's part of my story. Like traumatic amnesia is a very real thing. What we can do is notice the things that are coming up in the present time. One of the things I look for is what sort of core belief has been running our life, ruling the way we're operating. So maybe I grew up with trauma. Maybe I grew up with abuse. Maybe I don't remember all of it. I just know it was chaotic. Maybe I don't at all, but I feel chaotic. And as I'm talking with my therapist around the things in present time or the things that I do remember, my therapist, at least for me, this is true for me as a therapist, can start to pick up on, there's sort of this not good enough narrative that keeps showing. What is that? Or this, I'm responsible for everything. I need to do more. I can't relax. Like there's this thread that I'm noticing through everything we're talking about.
Right. That they might not even notice themselves.
Most of us don't.
Yeah.
Truly, we all have blind spots and we don't realize, because that's just the way we think, right?
Right.
So we don't know that until somebody looks at us and goes, what is that? And just gets super curious about it. That's something we can bring into EMDR. And that is often where things from childhood do come up. Although we might not be able to access the memory, we can see sort of the way that
it's shaped.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever heard anyone scream during EMDR? Like, I think people picture it to be this crazy experience and people are screaming or like,
No.
so no. Okay.
No screaming. I do think
Crying for sure, right?
crying happens, yes. And every therapist is different. I can only speak for me in that
Yeah.
I am so attuned to my clients. I am attuned to any shift they make, and some of that is
Right.
my somatic training. So I really track the body. So I have times where typically what I'll do for the bilateral when somebody is processing, you take breaks, you kind of pause in between, you check in.
Okay.
And sometimes the amount of time that I usually would have a set, so to speak, go for before I check in gets halted sooner because I notice something in their body.
Got it. Okay. Like you notice they're like tensing up or like you could see. So if I was doing the arm taps, am I closing my eyes while we do this?
You can. You can also fixate on a point. That's personal preference and safety. Super important. I always say don't look at me because I'm human, so I'll shift a little bit and distract her. So I have a very intentionally blank wall behind me here. This is my home office. So that's on purpose. I will kind of move myself out of frame.
Interesting. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. So you can have, again, most people who are listening and including myself, we just picture what we maybe thought about in our minds that it's this crazy, like, hypnotizing situation, but it's not that at all.
Oh yeah. Before I got trained, I was like, I'm not a county fair act. I'm literally not doing this. Heck no. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this for me. I don't want to do this for other people. Oh no. And then I hear you go through it and you're like, I see it now and I get it.
Yeah.
I see the values. So organization that I contract with to support financial assistance for first responders, the Overwatch Collective, which I'm actually wearing one of their gear today. Not promote your gear.
Yeah, no, girl, you're good.
But they said they just try it. It was kind of like the Nike, like just do it, like Nike. Honestly, that's just try it because there's the therapist's role is to help you establish safety. You might not feel comfortable. My motto is how can I support you feel open to doing uncomfortable stuff with me? And if you are not open to doing uncomfortable stuff with me, then we're not a fit. That doesn't mean that anything's wrong with me or you or therapy in general sucks. It just means like that wasn't a fit. And there are so many other options. So just try it, and finding that fit is crucial.
Yeah, definitely. Because like I said, I've had people who weren't the best fit for me. But so let's get to relationships and first responders. So this is something that you do a whole laundry list of things, but I do have a lot of questions about it from my followers. And you said relationships is something you like to talk about, and it's definitely something I'm sure my listeners could relate to. So the public perception of, let's say, police officers is that like they cheat, they work to avoid their families, they have high divorce rates, and they escape their natural world when they go to work. Unfortunately, this is the reality sometimes. I'm sure it is in other careers too. It's not just first responders, but I have experienced it. I've seen friends of mine experience it. So I know it does happen. But I do have some questions from some followers from you. What do you think that the driving force of infidelity is in first responder relationships?
This is such a hard question.
I know it is. It really is.
So I don't know, do you post video or do you only do audio?
I do video too.
Okay. So, I don't know why I asked that. I had a reason why I asked that, and it just totally
I thought you were going to bring out two little like dolls. Here's the
example. Actually, it'll probably happen now. This is a hard question, and we're going to see my eyes divert because for anyone who doesn't know this, I did get these questions last night, and I looked at them very late. I was watching TV, and I was like, I'm just gonna like just look through, and I got to that question. I was like, how do I answer this? It can be different. It can be different for everyone. There is absolutely a perception, right? There's a statistic, right? Everyone really points to this statistic that says that the divorce rate is higher in first responder relationships. Right. And the thing that people point to often is sort of this concept of the rush. And that's what people are always saying. It's the rush, right?
We're like rush junkies. That's why we have this job.
Yeah. Adrenaline, right? Mm-hmm. And I personally struggle with that description because while that might be a piece of it for some, there's also this deeper reality of first responder careers, which is cumulative stress and a lack of teaching our first responders how to complete their stress cycles. And so our bodies having an innate desire to heal, try to do that, try to keep going in different ways and try to accomplish that task, right? We're trying to do that often. And sometimes the ways that we do that are adaptive and sometimes they're maladaptive.
This is the best description I've ever heard. And you're not even done. But you're already so right. Keep going. Like you're hitting the nail on that.
And so sometimes what happens is, it's not so much about the rush as it is that our bodies are so very used to performing at this specific place in our stress cycle. And so then when we go home and we maybe don't know how to transition home, or our partner doesn't understand much about our job, and so we're not getting that support that we need, we don't know how to communicate that because also, surprise, the academy didn't teach you what you need, right? They taught you how to do it, but they didn't talk to you maybe about what you needed.
Right.
So this really starts to come into conflict. And then this door sometimes opens. And I always talk and I've worked with people who have been working through either as a couple, they're working through infidelity, or I've worked with a person who engaged in the infidelity. And I am a big proponent of shame has no place. It really just has no place. Responsibility absolutely does have a place.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when we move into what it looks like to have an adaptive relationship with our responsibility, and if infidelity is within this, we then have to also look at all those other things, which is deeper than the rush is, were we dysregulated? What did that do, bringing it to the surface? So the surface level thing is the rush, but deeper than that is dysregulation. Within that dysregulation is I feel lonely. Above that is my partner doesn't understand what I do. I tried to connect with them and they dismissed me, or they said something that shut me down. So instead, then I went to work and I met so-and-so and we got to talking and they really understood it. So then I invited them to lunch because I just needed someone to talk to about. And so now all this.
Totally, 100%. It's like a buildup. It totally is.
Right. So I always like to point that out because I know that it can be different for everybody.
Yeah.
And just to target in this moment, the best way I could answer it is to really just target that thing that is said all the time, right? Like it's the adrenaline, it's the rush of the engagement. And while that's up here on the surface and maybe part of it, truly deeper than that is something completely different. And when I'm working with someone who is engaged in an extramarital or committed relation outside of their committed relationship, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Because if we just look at that rush, I'm missing them and actually probably perpetuating part of the wound that contributed to how we got
Yeah.
here.
Oh my God. You hit the nail on the head with that. Like, I think you described it perfectly. I couldn't have said it better. I truly, like, this needs to be on like national TV. Like you really nailed it with that. Um, so okay, what would you say to a couple who is struggling and is hesitant to get couples therapy?
It's confidential is the first thing I'd say. First thing I'd say.
I think as a first responder, we're always afraid to get help because we don't want to act like we need help.
Totally.
You know?
And stigma, and will somebody find out, and what will they say about me? Will I still be fit for duty, so to speak? Like, all of these things.
Yeah.
Hesitant to get to couples therapy. Well, there can be many different components to that. This is, typical therapist. I'm like, I have 18 weeks. I can.
Have you seen it actually help couples though? Like, have you seen them become much stronger than when they walked in? Like, that's the ultimate goal, right?
Yes, and I'll kind of say back to what I talked about with the EMDR piece is establishing safety in that room is important. And when you are walking into couples therapy, there's typically some underlying feeling of not safe in your couples relationship. Our attachment wounds are showing up, and a trained, competent, in tune, ability to attune couples therapist will know that, see that, and that'll be the first thing they do with you is what kind of container, so to speak, different than EMDR, that's just the language I use. What's the container or the framework of how we show up here and how we operate here? And that helps to establish okay, I might be able to talk about this uncomfortable thing that I'm scared to talk about with my partner, or
right,
I get it. Hailey isn't, as a therapist, going to let us engage in this thing in her, right? I don't want to go there and just fight in front of someone. Like, sometimes I let that happen because I need to see.
Yeah, like the body language. Yeah.
Right. And then many times I'll be like, all right, pause. And I am very much in the couples space known for you're going to be heard and how are you going to be heard? And that's super important for establishing that. So I know it's scary. Scary might not even be the word. It might be like, I don't even want to unpack any of this. It's just, whatever.
It's just so vulnerable because I feel like a lot of people think it's like when I'm walking into that room with my partner going to couples therapy, it's because we are so low and we have nothing, like we have no hope and this is our last ditch effort. But I do want to touch on too, and you can attest to this, that you don't have to go to couples therapy because you're struggling, right? You can go to like grease the oil in the car, right?
100%. That's why like premarital therapy exists. For that. Learning your attachment styles. The most common attachment that happens in marriages is the pursuer distancer, is how I'll put it. And what it is typically two opposite wounds. So one person has the fear of abandonment, and it's an abandonment wound. And the other one has a fear of what's called engulfment. Like, you are going to, with all of this, don't go away, like, come closer thing, going to engulf me. And so then I shrink and I get smaller.
Yes.
Perpetuate. Like, this person is like, no, show up. And this one's like, I can't. You're scaring me.
You're
frustrating me, or whatever it is, right? And it can be really challenging when in that dynamic and in time, what can happen is two people can turn away. And so there can be just this feeling of, how do I even, like, I'm so hurt by this person. I don't even want to put I call it, because humor, I call them banana guns. I don't want to put my banana gun down and show up into that room.
Right.
And so that's the first thing that your therapist will do with you is like, okay, when you're walking into this room and these things are happening and we're struggling and we're uncomfortable and we don't know the process, that's what we're going to do first. We're going to establish the process so that you can't put your banana gun down. And that takes two people. And then we get to talk about, like, okay, in your relationship, you guys, because this is what couples therapy is about, is about the dance and the
Back and forth. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
it's the dance. So it's not this person or this person individually, that's individual therapy, but it's the dance. And so maybe for a long time you've been doing the tango.
Yeah.
And one
Break dancing.
yeah. One is like, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to break dance. And this one's like, so we go back and we do the tango again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And eventually we're doing it again. And then both people are like, I want to do this. I want to do that. How do we establish a process to figure out, like, you know what? Maybe sometimes we hip hop. Maybe sometimes we salsa. Like, figure
Yes.
out how we do that in that dance. So I totally know it's really hard, and there's hesitation, and there's all this stuff will come up. If you invest in the process, it will change things. Well, I mean, to be super direct about it, I'll be very direct. You'll learn that I'm pretty direct. If you weren't seeking change, you wouldn't be considering it in the first place.
Right. Right.
So find that therapist that helps you feel open to doing uncomfortable stuff. I just go back to that every single time.
Yeah.
Because like one of the most unfortunate things that happens when we don't just like trust our gut feeling when we're on a consult call with a therapist is that then you aren't open to doing uncomfortable stuff, and then you won't show up there, and then you won't see those changes that you're looking for. So
Yeah.
have the consultation call. Remember everything I just said. If you relate to it at all, like anything I've said is just going back, oh, that's me, that's us. There is another option. There's a different dance you can do, or you can do the same dance and wear different shoes. That's fine too.
Yeah.
That part of the process is to figure that out.
Yeah.
You're not required to come in and just like 180 change your life.
Right.
You decide not.
And it's not going to take one session to like change your marriage and like make it 10 times better. It's going to take work, or just to build on your good relationships, like make your communication styles better. It's going to take time.
Absolutely.
Everything takes time.
Everything.
I'm open to going to couples therapy because we're getting married in April, and we're great. I have no complaints, but can there always be work done? Absolutely. And I have no problem about it, but definitely before I was afraid to talk about therapy. And now I'm an open book about it. It's no problem. But it is weird and uncomfortable for police officers. And maybe I'm being judgy, but based on my fiance, especially men, to talk about their feelings, they're weird about it, especially listening to other people talk about their feelings all day. They don't even want to hear the word feelings, you know? So it's different.
And society, right? If you look at the historical way that men were raised in society.
Yeah, to be this tough guy.
Yeah, getting in tune with your feelings was absolutely not the definition of masculinity, which is what society was promoting.
Right.
Just having this conversation with a therapist friend of mine, actually, like right before we hopped on, and we were talking about just look at the advertisements for first responder careers or military, right?
It's like,
are you fucking badass?
Are you ready to kick this door down on motherfucker? And I'm like, you're ready to shoot guns and get the arm sleeves and wear a shield. Like, and it's really not like that, you know? It's not.
Well, and that's cool.
Like 24/7 at all.
Yeah, and that's cool. You don't see that part of you. I mean, be that part of you if you want to be that part of you. I think one of the things I've learned in first responder professions a lot is how powerful the question of, do you even want to? Now, do you need to? Because that is coming up a lot, like should, right?
Right.
If you just like look at policy, for example, right? Like should and shall are typically like the most common words. You shall, you should, right? And those are really tied to pressure, tied to need. But how different it would be to go, well, do you want to? And that's important in couples work too, right? Like, well, when I am at work, I'm this person. When I come home, they want me to be this person. Okay. Can we support that process?
Right.
To do that. And that's the most powerful question I have found to give anyone in a first responder family or profession is like, do you want to? Let's start. Like, do we want to do this? like this. And then we go from there. If we don't, why not? What does that look like? Close your eyes, go to sleep. You wake up tomorrow. Everything's how you want it. What is it? Show me.
Right. Oh, yeah, definitely.
And we can talk about how we get there. And again, to your point of like premarital, and maybe we're just trying to figure out some things we didn't know were going on. Having that third party who is neutral, and in couples work, it's really about process more so than content. Someone that can look at either one of the partners, right, and go, did you notice that when you were expressing your feelings and then your partner reacted a little bit, that then you started self-deprecating? Was that meant to comfort your partner's emotions? And they go, yeah. And I go, okay, we'll talk about their emotions and I want to know about that. We're assuming something by doing that. So we're kind of taking their emotional experience. Let's try not doing that. Let's do this instead. And those things that we think we're being like big hearts and we're being so kind, we're like, hey, I know you didn't mean to do this on purpose and you're just really, really stressed out and blah, blah, blah. And next thing you know, we've made our feelings really small.
Right. Wow.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
Trying to help our partner digest this hard thing we're about to say.
Right.
But that process, our partner didn't ask us to do that. Are we then feeling like we're getting heard for truly what we're feeling? So things like that, right? This is where couples therapy is valuable. You don't even realize sometimes the way that you're engaging in that communication, and the therapist will be there like fly on the wall. Ooh, okay, hold on.
Flag.
Did you?
I
And we have to be really bold in the couples space. It's definitely different than individual work in that sense of you really managing that neutrality in that space with two people, and ensuring as well that you can check in and point out that thing that's happening between, like, I hate to be swaying back and forth. That's true.
That dance.
Yeah. Okay, I'm getting a feel for your dance and I'm going to point the dance out. And I'm not sitting here in judgment if that's good, bad, or indifferent. You tell me. I'm just going to reflect to you what I notice. And then you can tell me if that's rad for you or that's not.
Makes sense. Definitely makes sense. One more question for you. I do feel like a lot of, even me, I'm in law enforcement. I feel this, and I'm sure women who are not in law enforcement feel this, or first responders, or say any job. My boyfriend cheated on me in the past. We got therapy. We worked through it. We're still together. I still struggle with thinking about it and sometimes get insecure when we are around other women. What can I do to build confidence in my relationship?
Huge question. And like, this is someone sent this question in, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, like badass for even wanting to dive into it, because it can be really hard to just even do what you're doing, which is ask this question. And when we do that, I talk about this with couples a lot when there's been a wound that's taken place like this, where what you do asking this question even is pointing out like, hey, here's this wound. So that wound may have a scab over. And if our partner is engaging in behaviors that press our wound and cause it to bleed, they need to know that.
Wow.
While they're not responsible, well, in this case, they might be responsible for the wound being there. Sometimes they're not, right? Sometimes it's something we've brought into the relationship from the past. And we are still, while we have this wound, we get to take some responsibility, and maybe not that it got put there, but that it is there. And so we have the ability to go, you know what? I can be empowered in working through this for myself. So in that sense, that's kind of what I mean by responsible. So you might be the reason it's there, but it is there. So if we're willing to look at that, and we're willing to look at that in our relationship, we might start to, and hopefully our partner is receptive, and this is where sometimes couples therapy is helpful, tell them like, hey, when we do this, it really presses on this wound. And I start to feel like it starts to bleed, right? So, hey, when we're around other women, this wound starts to bleed and I struggle. Okay, well, so that can open up a really cool conversation for them of how can we show up in those spaces because we're going to probably be around other women.
Right.
They exist in the world, right?
Right.
What can my partner do to support me in that moment, right? What need is showing up? And sometimes we don't really know what that is. Sometimes that's where individual therapy can also be really powerful, right?
Like in this case, to build up her confidence.
Yeah. And to maybe address something underneath this, right? If I walk into my relationship, for example, with the wound that maybe when I was young, I had a family member that wasn't really present in my life. And when they were really harmful. So maybe I didn't learn boundaries around this, or maybe I absorbed this as something to do with me being bad or that I'm a problem or I'm not good enough.
Right.
We don't think that way in our mind. It's just subconscious. We don't, when these things happen, we don't go, oh, it's because I'm not good enough. When we're super young, we might. When we get older, that just starts to be our process. So we don't even have an awareness that this happens. So then maybe we get in a relationship, our partner engages in an affair. Next thing you know, this wound that I have is being very much put on display and it's bleeding because that's right. This is what people do. They hurt me because I'm not good enough. They don't love me the way I need because I'm not good enough. And we don't even realize that that's happened. So sometimes that individual component of this work is really helpful.
Right.
You might forgive your partner. You might have been heard by your partner. You might have even established those ways that your partner now knows, hey, these are the triggers. So I want to be really gentle about how I operate as to not engage those triggers. Well, the other part of this is working on your triggers, right? Because the hope that we can work through, we can do things like EMDR, like just making these connections. Right? Take EMDR and throw it way down the line if you're not ready, right? But just where did this come from? Is it tied to anything else? And oftentimes the things that are happening in the present are tied to things. And the very cool thing is through the process of therapy, we have the opportunity to do something different so that we're bringing different ties, new threads into our future.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for answering all these questions. You answered them like so amazingly and so eloquently. Do you have any final takeaways for anyone that's listening today who maybe will take away one of the things you said, or was one of my writer-inners, or anything? And then also, where can we find you online to follow you, or maybe even have therapy with you?
Yeah. Last little things. Gosh, I'm really bad at last little things. Try it. I'll just say, try it. If you're thinking about it, try it. I know it's hard. I sat there. I used to make the joke that when I was younger, especially, and I first went to therapy, that I would look at my older therapists and be like, Gretchen, you don't get it. You just don't get it, Gretchen.
Yeah. You don't understand.
You don't get it. And it can feel that way. It can really feel like somebody's just not going to get it. And there really are people who can, and you'll feel that. And I know that's the fluffy therapist thing to say of like, you'll feel that. But same thing in any, you go through your first responder training and they do tell you this. What does your gut say? Like, trust your gut. When you show up and you feel something and that sense is coming in, trust it. And that's the same thing with therapy. Try it and trust your gut. When you're reaching out to somebody and you are figuring out if that's going to be someone that you can do this with, trust your gut and don't be discouraged. There's so many what I always say in my consultation calls is I'm never offended. So if it's 2 minutes after the phone that you say, Hailey, let's do it. If it's 2 months, 2 years, I'm here. And if it's circling back and saying, you know what, something just didn't click. Do you have any referrals? Absolutely. Absolutely. For me personally, I just believe in this. So if I am just a conduit for that perfect fit for you, fabulous. So don't get discouraged. Find that person that feels like they click with you. And then I'm always, for anyone who listens, super happy to connect. Again, if that's just the only way that we link up is, hey, do you have any referrals? Especially, I'm in California, right? So someone listens to this and they're not in California, I can't see you. So I have other resources from just different trainings and different first responder retreats and things like that out of state that I can give names for. For me in particular, my website is palospractice.com. My Instagram is @Palos Practice. And then I do operate a podcast. It's called The Mental Cover Podcast @The Mental Cover Podcast. On Instagram, I am not as active on the podcast as you are on yours. You have this dialed way differently than I do. So
Trying, girl. I'm trying. I'm out here trying.
It's so hard. Someone just
It's hard.
It's so much more work than I thought. Like I didn't even use it for this, but I have my mic.
Yeah. I have my little guy. That's nicer than mine.
No, literally Amazon.
So this,
yes. But I do get episodes out as much as I can. I'll preemptively let everybody know we do use foul language on my podcast.
I love it.
We keep it real. I'm trying to get away from it so that if families are in the car, you could listen to it and still I had that reflection given to me and I was like, yeah, okay. That's a good one. I heard it.
Well, if you're working with first responders a lot, we swear a lot. So honestly, you swearing makes me more comfortable.
It's
an
exclamation point on what you're saying. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for everything. Go follow Hailey. DM her. I'm sure she's open if you have questions. Like she said, referrals, listen to her podcast, follow her page. She's like a no bullshit therapist, which is why I wanted to interview you. I could have probably reached out to other ones, but I love how you said, I'm not the cardigan wearing, like, gonna bullshit you type of therapist. And that's exactly what kind of therapist I would want. And I appreciate you answering all my crazy, weird questions and all of my followers' questions as well. And yeah, thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me. Seriously, my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. I feel like I had my own therapy session, so thank you.
I think I shared more in this episode than I have in other episodes. It was probably
you did.
Yeah.
And I like that. Are you Italian?
No, but
okay.
Maybe somewhere. I have.
Well, you have to be because you've done this quite a few times.
Yeah,
you're feeling it through the camera for my Italianness, but I love it. I love it.
I'm just absorbing in truth therapist form. This is a mirror.
Yes. Hey, that's one takeaway you give for me. I like it. Thank you so much, Hailey.